Welcome back for the final case study in the Global Case Studies with Digital Nations. We will now hear from the UK's Ministry of Justice on their Prison Leavers project. Isabel Olsen and Jeffrey Allen will join us to break down this cross-government project to improve social inclusion of people leaving prison. Please welcome Isabel and Jeffrey.
Hello, I'm Izzy.
And I'm Jeff. And we're going to talk to you a bit today about how we're exploring a new way to design government policy in the United Kingdom. But before we talk about how we're innovating, we'd like to talk for a minute about why we're innovating. We're innovating because government doesn't work as well as it should anymore. It's debatable whether it ever did. But in the 21st century, with centuries of accumulated knowledge and technological advancements and human experiences behind us, and all available for us to learn from at the touch of a button, we believe that government can work better for the people it serves. Education, healthcare, police, sanitation, transportation, food safety, pretty much every human being and many animals interact with government services every day of their life. 36% of all the money spent in and by the United Kingdom goes to public services, all the things we interact with every day. When we take the bus, when someone comes to collect our rubbish, when our children go to school, when we eat food that's been inspected to make sure there are no harmful chemicals, it's all public services. In fact, 80% of the cost of government is services. And when we add government policies into the mix, we realize that government decisions actually touch everything we do. They determine what the ecosystem of services look like and how it functions. Basically, everything that people engage with in their day-to-day life is regulated or determined in some way by government policies. How much did your lunch cost? What dangerous chemicals were or weren't in it? Who sold it to you? How did you get to the place where you bought it? Did you go there on a break from work? Does your workplace allow you time to break for lunch? What happens if you get sick and can't work for a while? What support will you have? What happened before work this morning? Was it cold in your house? Could you afford to turn the heating on? Were the rubbish bins collected early in the morning? Did you drop your kids off at school on the way to work? Did they take a bus? Are they getting a good education? What do they do after school? Are there activities to keep them busy and learning and growing? The answer to every single one of those questions depends on government policy. Everything. But 73% of British people say they don't have confidence that our current leaders will be able to successfully address our country's challenges. Less than 30% believe politicians are genuinely invested in solving societal issues. And 60% think democracy is losing its effectiveness as a form of government. Those are very worrying statistics about the state of government today. Here's some more. 65% of young people reoffend within 1 year of leaving custody. The average civil court process takes nearly 60 weeks, more than a year. Even small claims take more than 9 months. 14% of people leaving prison are released straight into homelessness. Only 10% of those who leave prison in the UK are in employment 6 weeks later. And that's not a COVID quirk. The number was only 13% in the year before COVID struck. We're not doing well enough. As Tom Loosemore said back in 2014, we have to fix government. Tom was one of the founders of the UK Government Digital Service. Tom and his co-founders launched a revolution in how we design and deliver digital services, at least here in the UK. He said this in a speech to digital activists in the US back in 2014, but he's also said it many times before and since. As he said then, a functioning, trusted government is absolutely the core of civilization. Our job is to help government take the opportunities of the digital revolution to regain trust and become even more effective. That revolution in how we design and deliver digital services hasn't yet reached the rest of the services government delivers, and it definitely hasn't reached the policymaking process. Remember, government policy decisions determine the shape and size and flavor of every service and pretty much every interaction that touches our lives in some shape or form every single day. We believe we can apply many of the lessons of the revolution in delivering digital services to the process of government policymaking. In fact, we think the project of redesigning digital services will never be realized until we transform the way policymaking functions as well. until we transform the way government functions overall. And one of the main things we'll need to do is change the shape of government. One of the primary issues is that government functions in silos. Each institution runs its own services and its own infrastructure top to bottom, pursues its own outcomes, often without paying too much attention to any others, and builds systems that often don't talk to any others. But while government is built in these verticals, people live horizontally. In the UK, the issues that face a person leaving prison are owned by dozens of different institutions. So the Home Office oversees the police who would have arrested that person originally. The Courts and Tribunal Service oversees the judicial system. The Prison and Probation Service obviously manages the prison service where that person eventually ends up in custody. But lots of things impacted that person's life long before they ever were arrested. The Department for Education is obviously overseeing the education system. What sort of education did that person get early in life? Mental health, physical health are huge issues that impact so many people early in life that play a role in determining whether or not they're going to end up in that path to be arrested someday. So many young people who end up in prison have touched the health and social care department earlier in their life as well. Once they leave custody, mental and physical health again is critical in someone's transition back into the community. Someone who's come out of prison very often wants to get access to universal credit or other benefits. That's the Department for Work and Pensions who regulates all of that. And then later in life, so many people need access to the Department for Health and Social Care again. But those are just the major government agencies. Think of all the local organizations, the local councils, the nonprofit organizations, the housing associations, all these different institutions that an individual will interact with who play some role in their experience throughout that time. The issue is that these organizations see the world from their own perspective. Government was designed from the perspective of people who need to account for things, and accounting requires nice, neat buckets of things. Silos, if you will. But the real world is much messier than that. This is what I mean when I say that while government exists in verticals, people live horizontally. And between each of these vertical silos, there are massive cracks for people to fall between. More than cracks, canyons. Not to mention the frustration it causes ordinary people to have to tell their story over and over again just to get access to the services that politicians tell them they have a right to. Now imagine you're coming out of prison. You've been sentenced, you've done your time, you're ready to get your life started again. But you've likely been through some very traumatizing things before your time in prison and quite possibly while you were in custody as well. Your education may have been cut off. You may not have the support structures to fall back on at home or in your community. You might have learning difficulties or mental or physical health issues, probably little to no savings. You might not even have an ID card or other basic documentation. You seem to never get callbacks for job interviews, likely because you had to declare that you've been convicted of a crime. You have a harder time getting social housing. Wherever you go in society, you feel like the deck is stacked against you. You need these services more than anyone, and you have a harder time navigating them than anyone else. We like to think of people's journeys as linear, nice straight lines from one experience to the next, isolated from everything else that's going on in their life. And we draw them like this when we're thinking about how to improve things for those people. But the reality looks much more like this. People's experiences are complex and messy. They interact with dozens of people, institutions, agencies, services, and bump up against the results of hundreds of policies every day. There's a principle of complexity theory that explains that a system is not just the sum of its parts. It's a product of how its parts interact with each other. We can only make the whole system of interrelated institutions and services and policies work better for people when we acknowledge that complexity and find ways to engage with it. So what are we doing differently? I couldn't help including a slide that says this. It's basically the UK digital government credo at this point, a flag we pledge allegiance to every day. But there's a reason it's still the first and most important point in the UK government service standard. It's absolutely essential that we take a person-centered approach to problem solving instead of an organization-centered approach, and that is by no means standard practice yet outside of digital teams. We're looking at the whole system, not focusing on a single service or even a single department's goals. I stole this from the brilliant Andreas Siodmak, who was the founder of the UK Government Policy Lab. Basically, what we're looking at here is how society functions, with the individual person at the center. People interact with services to get things done in their life. You may not be interacting with a service at every moment of your life, but whatever you are doing at every moment was enabled by a service at some point. You had to buy the things. You had to travel to get to wherever you are. Services enabled all of that. Some person or organization provided that service, and government policies determine how those systems of services function. Our team is working across the whole spectrum of issues that impact people leaving prison, from central government policies upstream to frontline operations downstream, both digital and non-digital. So why does that matter? So this I stole from Tom Loosemore. This explains how government tends to operate. One team writes policy, another team tries to figure out what the requirements would be to achieve that policy, another then procures a system to meet those requirements, and another team actually operates the service that a person needs to engage with to achieve whatever it is they're trying to do. So Tom was talking about how digital services tend to be procured and delivered. But I think it's true pretty much for all services. We don't think this works. So our team is engaging the whole system, not any single part of it. We start by understanding the people at the heart of our system, people who go through and eventually leave the prison system. From there, we have to understand all the services that those people interact with and how those services operate. From there, we have to understand the whole ecosystem of all of those services that those people interact with, how all those systems interrelate, and how those systems function. And we have to understand all the policies and the intentions behind those policies that allowed those ecosystems of services to form in the way that they form today. And once we've understood that whole sphere of activity, from people to services to systems and policies, then we have to identify where are the leverage points, where are the points in those systems that we can actually influence change and make sure that the system gets healthier and achieves the outcomes that we all want it to achieve. And we're not only innovating in how we're working, but we're also innovating what a team looks like. We're bringing policymakers and frontline staff together with designers and researchers and digital specialists. We're not doing this just for workshops, but these are full-time staff working together all day, every day, to understand the problems people face and find ways to make things better for them, ways that are actually deliverable in the real world and will be effective. And then that multidisciplinary team working across the whole spectrum of individuals, services, systems, and policies is taking an agile, iterative approach to problem solving. First off, I should point out that the word solving is in quotations here. That's very much intentional. It's because we acknowledge upfront that in the complex systems we're working within, none of the problems we tackle will actually ever be solved. Our goal is not actually solving, but rather building a healthier overall system by identifying areas for improvement and continuously plugging away. You never solve issues of crime in society. You never solve the question of how do we better educate our children. These are all complex issues that don't have solutions, but you can continuously improve the systems that get us to better places in each of those questions. There are no big bang solutions to the issues we're tackling. If there were, someone would have found them by now. What there are ways to make things function more effectively for the people within the system. People in prison and on probation, prison staff, probation staff, prison governors, probation managers, the families of people in prison and on probation. We look for ways to improve their lives every day. We start by exploring the problem space as broadly and deeply as possible, identifying the key issues that are impacting people who go through and eventually leave the prison system. Then we move into a discovery, focusing more closely on an area of that problem space. With the deeper understanding we gain, we'll then be able to identify a whole host of things we could do to make things better. Those are the leverage points we're looking to identify. Where could we intervene to make the system function better? Looking across all those public, private, and nonprofit organizations and institutions I mentioned a few minutes ago, what services could be improved? Which policies could be changed? Who has the power to make those changes? What's stopping them from doing that? How can we untangle the web of connections to start improving the system in critical ways? Some of these interventions will be large scale. We're ready for that. We'll take an agile approach, starting small with an alpha phase, where we'll explore potential solutions, identify some promising ones, and then test those out in a beta phase with a limited number of people. Only once we get a sense that an intervention is likely to improve the system will we expand it out to a public beta and eventually a live phase. But there will also be dozens, maybe hundreds of potential micro-interventions that we'll identify. What policy needs to change to enable people in prison to get identification before they leave, to secure accommodation before they're released? How can we make small tweaks in services to allow these things to happen? Who decides on those policies, those services? What's the intention behind those policies? How might those intentions and those policies and those services be adjusted to ensure we're achieving the system-wide goals of supporting people out of prison and back into the community? This will be a long-term process of learning, identifying leverage points, building relationships across the whole system, testing ideas for change, seeing what works, and influencing those who have the power to make important changes to create a more effective system of policies and services. And as we go, we'll continuously be learning and adapting our approach. So overall, you can break down what we're doing differently into three main things. We're building truly multidisciplinary teams, bringing together policymakers, frontline staff, and designers and researchers. We're working across the whole system, and we're working in continuous agile cycles of learning, testing, and influencing. And to hold our teams to account, we've developed the first draft of what we're calling a policy design standard. So it's based off the UK government service standard. We've adapted that to ensure we're following the principles we've set for ourselves. So the first group of principles of this standard are around being user-centered and systemic in our work. So the things I talked about around ensuring we're putting the user at the center, the people at the center of all of our research and ideas. We're identifying root causes, not just symptoms. We're looking at system-wide problems, and we're identifying opportunities for change that are future-proof, that are scalable. But in addition to that, we also have to make sure we're always rooting ourselves in reality at all times. So the decisions our teams make need to be based on evidence backed by research. We're going to be measuring outcomes as we go and iterating along the way. We aim to design interventions that can be evaluated, and we need to make sure that we're working within constraints, but also challenging constraints when they do come up. And then in addition to that, we need to make sure that we're working effectively and efficiently at all times. So these are principles around ensuring the diversity of our teams work in ways that are inclusive and ethical, that we're embracing agile ways of working, and that we're working as a whole network, not just as a team, and that we're constantly working in the open. So with that all said, now I'll hand it over to Izzy to talk to you about how we're actually doing all of this.
Jeff has been talking a little bit about the strategy, and now it's time to talk about some of the practicality. So hopefully I can shed some light on what this looks like in reality for our team and how we're working to meet some of these design standards that Jeff has mentioned. So on the Prison Leaver project, we have been funded by the Treasury to work across the whole system, thinking and acting holistically. We have 4 teams, each with a specific area of focus, but all working together across the whole spectrum of things that impact a human being. Our 4 teams are health and well-being, community and relationships, employability and skills, and day 1 of release. These teams were chosen because these subject matters fundamentally impact someone the whole way through their journey in the criminal justice system. So this is my team. I work in the communities and relationships team, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the people in our team and the roles and expertise that they bring. So as Jeff mentioned, the idea of these teams is that they're truly multidisciplinary, bringing in different people with different experience, perspectives, and expertise to try and solve the problem in a different way. So Zoe is our policy lead. She is seconded in from a third sector organization called Changing Lives. And she works with us for 4 days a week and 1 day a week back at Changing Lives. And the idea behind her role is that we have lots of different people as policy leads, and they're all coming in from different organizations such as NHS England, the local government association, and then other third sector organizations outside. And the idea is that we start to kind of bridge these gaps between our teams and other people and organization across the systems working together to solve the problem. We then have a policy advisor, Vincent. He's been working in MOJ for about 20 years, and he's really our kind of policy specialist in the team, and going to be leading on that when we need to make changes and iterations in that space. We're currently recruiting for an operational lead, but this role has typically been filled with someone from probation or the Job Centre Plus, providing that kind of deep knowledge of what it's like to try and solve some of these problems from an operational perspective. Then we have me. I'm a service designer, and I'm more of a kind of specialist in kind of design, following this kind of agile process and agile delivery, and moving the team through working in a new way. I work very closely with Louisa, who's our user researcher. She leads on kind of all the engagement that we have with people in custody and in probation, and kind of understanding those user needs. And then finally, we have Usman. He's our junior policy officer, and he actually has lived experience of being in custody. So this is the first time ever the Ministry of Justice has actually employed someone with lived experience of being in custody into one of our delivery teams. That's something new that we're all doing, and I think it's just been a really incredible experience for, you know, checking yourself basically, and the way you're working. Okay, so the first cluster of standards are focused around user-centered and systemic. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we've done to address those. So we started our work with something called exploration. We did this to understand the current landscape. So through this work, we were aiming to get visibility on the user experience, the work happening within HMPPS, so the prisons and probation services, cross-government, so other departmental work and that's going on that's relevant to someone leaving prison, and then also a little bit of insight into the third sector. So we did all this work so that we could identify focus areas for each of our service team that would add most value and impact on our users. So what we did was we mapped out a person's end-to-end journey through custody, looking through a variety of lenses. So we started by mapping out the prisoner action from before custody to once they've left. And then we mapped out the staff action that was supporting the prisoner action. And then we mapped out the backstage action that was supporting this, followed by the systems used to support this action, the data collected during this action, the policy underpinning the action, and finally, we had a layer that documented any questions or concerns around this particular action. And these would then become our potential focus areas for us to explore within our individual teams later on down the line. Of course, every person's journey through custody is different, and this map is pretty high level to get a systemic overview of what's happening and where we can identify our problem spaces. But as you can see, it was still pretty huge. This work shows how we're meeting points 3 and 4 of our policy design standard. So we're identifying and addressing the system-wide problems, not isolated issues, and we're identifying opportunities for change that are future-proof and scalable. We then synthesize this and defined a starting point for our research phase, what we call discovery. So in my service community and my team, our starting point was, how might we support people in prison who lack beneficial relationships to reduce the loss of social skills imposed by prisons so that we can avoid potential negative symptoms such as loneliness during and after prison? We believe that there is an opportunity for harnessing relationships as a positive resource for rehabilitation of people leaving custody. So this is very broad, which is unusual for a discovery. So we did this on purpose so that we didn't see problems in isolation, and we continued to look at the whole system surrounding relationships. We then began our research phase of the project, discovery. We conducted 31 qualitative interviews, visiting 3 prisons, and had 12 conversations with men in custody and 18 conversations with prison and probation staff. This phase of the work is about intense listening and sponging, meeting the standard number 1, understanding people's lived experiences and their needs. The second cluster of standards are focused around rooting ourselves in reality. So after we conducted our research, we did many collective analysis sessions, followed by a 3-day long workshop to develop intervention ideas. But we weren't just creating ideas out of thin air. We followed a process that is based on the theory of change model. So after we felt we had a better understanding of the problems and the needs, we began thinking about the outcomes that we wanted to achieve to improve these problems and to meet those needs. Then we generated ideas of how we could intervene and the activities that each of these ideas will consist of. We have been framing all of our ideas in hypotheses so that we can clearly communicate the problem, the idea, and the outcome that we hope to achieve. We then created a criteria to sense check all of our ideas against their feasibility, desirability, and viability. We asked ourselves things like, will we have ministerial or senior stakeholder buy-in? How much do we know about the policy in this area? Is this desirable for our user? How easily can we measure this? What infrastructure will this idea need? And then we marked all of our ideas against each other so that we could see if and where we had gaps in our team knowledge. All of this work allows us to understand our constraints and the reality we are working within so that we can make effective design decisions that are easy to evaluate. The final cluster of standards are focused around working effectively and efficiently. So how do we work? We work in 2-week sprints. Each of these are framed with agile ceremonies. So we have weekly planning, daily stand-ups, and retrospective sessions. All of this was completely new to most members of our teams who had never delivered work in an agile environment. There was a lot of time taken at the beginning of this project to ensure that everyone felt supported with learning new delivery tools and methods, such as Trello and Miro. We started to see a pattern in the way we were working, which I think will continue as our ideas develop. We seem to be working in a learning cycle that consists of 2 weeks outward facing, doing user testing, user research, and stakeholder engagement, followed by 2 weeks of inward facing, reflecting as a team, iterating on our work based on what we've heard, and then 2-week outward facing, continuing to share and test and do research with our users, with our stakeholder communities, and then again 2 weeks back in, reflecting and iterating, and so on and so on and so on in that pattern. This is one example of an activity that we've been doing in our outward-facing sprints. It's to develop a systems map with some of the experts from our third sector and lived experience communities. Once we had defined a clear set of findings from our research, we use these as a starting point to dig deeper into the root causes and effects of each problems that we've identified. This has helped us to connect the dots between each of our findings and see the interconnectivity between our intervention spaces. It also draws attention to the unintended consequences that we might encounter with the work we are doing. So what comes next for us? We're going to continue to work in this way. Test, learn, adapt. Test, learn, adapt. Eventually starting to implement changes in various parts of the system, both micro and macro, working towards our short-term outcomes and long-term visions. This is where we are now in our cross-government project. Until now, we've been listening, sponging, synthesizing, defining, and now we're about designing, testing, making, and all the way throughout continuing to learn about what works and what we need to adapt in the process. We'll continue doing this over the coming months and years so that we make the overall system healthier and more effective to achieve the outcomes that we want to see, which is reducing reoffending and ensuring a better life chances for people leaving prison. This project is an experiment, and we're really glad to have the chance to share it with you. We're happy to answer whatever questions you have in case there's anything that we're doing and learning that might be valuable to you. But we'd also love to hear from you about what you think works and what you don't think doesn't work, so that we can have an open discussion and move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey and Isabel. All right, everyone, now you can join them as well. You can chime in through question and answer. So you follow the Wonder link in the agenda to have a bit of a chat with them. But otherwise, that concludes our session. So thank you again for joining the Digital Nations case studies. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about what goes on inside these leading digital governments. Don't forget to join the conversation on Twitter using #forward50. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. And there's still more to come. So tomorrow, keynotes start at 10 a.m. And for tonight, we have One Team Gov running a virtual social right after this from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. And then at 6, we have Policy Ignite. So come see some great presentations. Everything is in the agenda, everything you could ever hope for. So looking forward to seeing you then.